All right, and so I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Rob Rabasco. Rob has been a DNR Section of Wildlife employee for over
Yes.
20 years, and um, he has had positions in Nicollet, Brainerd, and Park Rapids, Minnesota. And his current position is
Uh-huh.
Natural Resources Program Coordinator for the Minnesota Loon Restoration Program, which he'll be talking about today. And so now I'll hand it over to you, Rob, to begin your presentation. So thank you. And again, as a reminder, everyone, please make sure you're muted um, while Rob's giving his presentation. And take it away, Rob.
Thanks, Waverly. Can you hear me, everybody? Just like wave or make some kind of, if we have my, there we go. All right. Well, one thing I did have here, Waverly, and I'm not familiar with it, was I've had about 3 requests to annotate, probably pronouncing that wrong, the presentation. I'm not sure what that's all about. If it's related at all to having a copy of the presentation, I can't do that. It's a long story, but this is a joint project, as you'll learn as I give the presentation with some federal partners. And honestly, there is some back and forth we have to go through if we have copies of the presentation for distribution. So the easiest solution for us was just not to make any distribution. So apologize for that, but that's kind of where we're at. Recording is okay, and if you have questions, um, uh, please feel free. I don't with this particular format. Can we do like hand raising? Is there a thing where you can indicate on your little icon that
Yes.
you want my attention? Let's go with that, and I'll try to pay attention and see if we can do that. Otherwise, we can just run through it and have folks ask questions at the end when they have the mic. Thanks for having me. As Waverly said, I've been with DNR for quite a long time now. I was approached by our regional management team and our non-game unit about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now, to help out with this project. This project started in 2019, and it kind of got put on hold. They didn't have anybody to work on it. The folks that were charged with working on it had a lot of other things to do. And it does require a lot of coordination with our federal partners at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the U.S. Geological Survey. Um, I went on at 50%. So I worked in my old job and I worked in this job half and half for quite a few months and then took this full time. This one is set to sunset in 2024. So we're trying to get as much done as we can, and I'll go into that. The program itself is relating to the restoration. Oh, we have someone's mic is on there. The program itself works with loon habitat and outreach with our stakeholders. That's folks like you. I can run through some of this early stuff here on loons fairly quickly. I think everybody's familiar with our state bird. Um, we are running this program through our non-game wildlife program. Some of you folks might be familiar with them. The chickadee checkoff on your taxes has been around a long time now, and folks have really been helpful with checking that off and helping out the non-game program. Non-game program used to be part of the wildlife section, but was split off a number of years ago. And as you can tell by the first slide here with this beautiful loon, beautiful loons, that it's part of the Ecological and Water Resources Division. Okay, my slides aren't advancing. There we go. So some basics on loons. You probably know a lot of this. They are a large bird. Whenever anybody asks me, I always say bigger than a mallard duck, smaller than a Canada goose. All these other characteristics I won't bother reading to you. You're familiar with them. Everybody loves the loon calls. Hearing those on the lake is both eerie and beautiful, depending on what kind of lake you're on. I have a small 70, 75 acre pond across the street. I've been here for 17 years, and I've had loons on that pond every year that I've lived here. And it's a sure sign of spring because they do come right after ice out to hear those loons at night. So, big fan of that myself. They live throughout the year in different places. As you probably well know, they're a migratory bird. And they nest and raise their young in Minnesota. as well as in Canada, as you can see by this map. And then during migration in the fall, they winter elsewhere. Our loons in Minnesota go to the Gulf of Mexico or Florida. And you'll see why that matters as we go through this presentation, how we got to the point of me speaking to you about loons. There's about 250,000 in the United States. We have the largest population in the lower 48, about 2%. We're proud of that. They're our state bird. Just a beautiful little picture there of the classic riding on the back of the adult. Everyone's familiar with that for protection when loon chicks are first hatched. You know, 8 years and years ago, decades ago, we didn't quite have it figured out as an agency on how to protect, conserve, or manage different critters. Well, we used to do things like raising pheasants and releasing them and such. But what we really learned is if you want to make a positive effect on any population of organisms in the state, you worry about one thing first, and that's habitat. Why? Because it's the most critical element of any organism's life, and secondly, it's the first thing that we lose, and the first thing that can be negatively affected by human behavior. So, Minnesota, we have breeding season for loons it starts right after ice out, and they can come and establish. They're a territorial bird. They will fight each other to the death for territories. Territory size is often a question asked, and honestly, the literature is all over the board. I usually tell people 100 acres, but then again, I've got loons across the street that are on 70 acres, so it really can vary. They like clear, deep lakes, and why do they like that? I don't know if you're familiar, but in this picture, the top picture there of the person holding a fish, that's a tulipy or a cisco. They've been called all kinds of things. Uh, Lake herring, that's not correct. Whitefish, that's also not correct. Those are different fish, but nonetheless, it's a super important fish for loons. When you have to migrate as far as loons do in the short amount of time that they do, much like our ducks, they got to really put on the feed bag in the fall before they go. And cisco are a high fat fish, like salmon, and they gorge on these things in clear water. Why the clear water? Because they're a visual predator. If you've had the lucky happenstance of being on a pontoon or a boat or a kayak or you name it, you've seen them foraging. It's a sight to see underwater. They're great anglers, so to speak, and they rely heavily in the fall on cisco. What's interesting is there's a co-evolution there. Cisco are opposite from the rest of our fish species, and they spawn in the fall, late September. And the right before migration, this is perfect because that's when the loons need to really fatten up before their trip. So in the shallow water of clear, deep lakes, that's where cisco live, because they're dependent on cold water mostly for oxygen. They'll forage on them and then take off. For nesting, they like irregular lakes. Your classic round lake doesn't help a loon out very much for several reasons. One, there's nowhere quiet to put your nest, and two, big round lakes have a fetch. If you've ever heard of the term fetch, there's a circumstance where the shape of the lake and the size of the lake and how much of it gets hit by the wind can have a negative effect on nesting because you can flood nests. So quiet, hidden shorelines and coves and bays, floating bog mats. There's a nest right here in the picture you can see. That's what they prefer for nesting. So why do we have this program? What are their populations at risk? They're stable. But we put them in a category in Minnesota called the species of greatest conservation need. They're a long-lived, high on the food chain bird that migrates and can be susceptible to habitat loss, habitat degradation. The example used here is oil spills, and we're going to get into just how that played into this program. And you lose habitat to development on shorelines, on lakes. and you have habitat fragmentation. If this bird wants a roughly 60 to 100 acre territory and there's nowhere within that territory to nest, then you're not going to have any more production. Of course, climate change can have an effect. As we increase the temperature of lakes, we can lose cisco as a forage fish. So that is a concern, even though we don't have evidence yet of loon populations dropping. It's one of those cases where my opinion on it is the following: are they stable? Looks like it. Should we worry about them? Probably should worry about all the critters. When you think about how development has gone, when you think about how climate change might affect it, it's better to get out in front of a problem than to always be reacting to the problem. Species of greatest conservation need. That's an actual designate. I got somebody else's mic on there. It sounds like they're chopping food for their lunch. So if you want to take a quick look and see if you've got your mic on, I'll be honest, that's a little distracting. I know it's an accident. Thanks. Species of greatest conservation need. That is a designation we have in our wildlife action plan, and it just means we're paying particular attention. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service classifies them as a bird of management concern, and I take that as the same way we take it here at DNR. Keep an eye on them. I kind of went over this. The primary threats are habitat loss, poor water quality, lead and mercury ingestion. I know you're probably familiar that lead toxicity from lead tackle is a pretty big problem for loons. We have dead loons every year due to the ingestion of lead. You know, loons, like any other bird, will swallow small rocks, pebbles, grains of sand. They'll do it because then within their body they crush the food that they eat. These birds swallow fish whole, as you've probably seen, and they don't have teeth, so they can't chew it to get it digestible. Instead, they use their crop, which is a part of their neck, to crush the food, and the rocks that they swallow and then get rid of serve as sort of interior teeth. So they often by accident swallow lead tackle in it while they're trying to gather those rocks, pebbles, and sand. So that's a major problem. Human disturbance is huge. I hear reports all the time of jet skis, boats, wave boats, wake boats rather, running over loons, especially the chicks because they're small and hard to see. The habitat one's the biggest one to me, though. If you look at these two pictures, the lower picture represents healthy shoreline habitat. I can see sedges, I can see wild rice, I can see bulrush all mixed in. That's what they want to hide in when they make their nests. And I like to joke with folks that the top picture, which is someone trying to restore a shoreline, you can see these what are called coconut rolls. It's a fiber material that takes a long time to break down, and then you can see those stakes put in. And what they're trying to do here in this top picture is they're trying to stabilize a shoreline that's been destabilized due to wave action from boats. And I don't know where on the lake this was taken, but there's also some developmental problems here that led to the loss of that shoreline. And I like to joke that that is the world's most optimistic loon. It's sitting on that coconut roll, waiting for that habitat to come back. So just kind of an indicator of how important it is for them. Why should we care? I mean, there's a bunch of reasons. I don't think I have to go over this with you, but the point is we should care, right? This isn't a emblematic species of what it means to live in the Northland. I don't have to tell you that. And here's some wise words from a better speaker and author than me, Aldo Leopold. I'll let you read that for a second while I get a drink of water. So now we'll move on to the project itself. We got our loons covered, and we'll talk about the project. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what happened in 2010 in April, but the British Petroleum Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded, and it spread oil all across Texas, from Texas to Florida. This was a major event that, prior to my inclusion in this project, I certainly remember. I remember the vivid pictures on the news of this oil just spewing out of the wreck here and onto the shoreline. I don't have it on this slide, but I've later been led to understand that somewhere around 900 to 1,000 loons were killed during this event. A lot of our loons go down to this exact location, and that's kind of why we jumped on board with this project with our federal partners. And the assessment of what happened there was done by the Department of the Interior, the EPA, the National Atmospheric Organization, and the Department of Agriculture. These are all federal bodies that came together as a trustee and looked at what the damages were. 2016, there was a settlement. The British Petroleum Oil Company paid $8 billion in damages over 15 years. So we're still kind of working on that. $700 million for adaptive management. And that's what we're doing here with this program. So all in all, this body that was created, the Open Ocean Trustee Implementation Group, they took that settlement money and they put it into projects across the U.S. that were affected by this oil spill. There are fish projects, there are reptile projects, there are other bird projects. Most important for us here in Minnesota is this next bit here, where in 2019, the Open Ocean Trustees, that federal body, funded the restoration of common loons in Minnesota. And that's about $7.5 million, and with the main goals of reducing mortality and increasing reproductive success. The DNR, that's us, that's me. We applied for grant dollars from that $7.5 million, and we were granted 4.8. And our focus is on acquisition or easements of lakeshore loon nesting habitat. I'm going to assume you're familiar with aquatic management areas and or wildlife management areas. We also have scientific natural areas. These are blocks of land that are put aside in the public trust. It's often mistaken, public land's often mistaken being owned by the state. I don't look at it that way. It's owned by the taxpayers. It's owned by the people. We are charged with managing it. So the big one here for this project is to acquire either through fee title, that means outright purchase, or putting conservation easements. That's a different sort. That's where the landowner continues to own the land, but agrees to certain modifications of their deeds, such that, for example, in this one, you wouldn't develop lakeshore. That's the big part of it. Other parts of it, and we'll go over this as I go through here, are engaging lake associations and conservation activities. And I'll tell you how we're going to do that in a minute. And then the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency got $1.2 million to work on reducing loon exposure to lead-based fishing tackle. And that's all through outreach and lead exchange programs. And I work with them on this project to do that, to increase the education of folks on what lead tackle does for populations, especially loons. Our goal, same goal as the open ocean TIG, reduce mortality and increase reproductive success in Minnesota for our loons. The primary strategy, like I said, is through acquisition and easement, but we're also hoping to permanently protect targeted shorelines through that. As far as the project itself, can be broken down into these 4 objectives. The one I've hit up twice already. The other objectives are interesting, and this is where folks, stakeholders, can come in. Augmenting natural nesting with what are called artificial nesting platforms, or ANP. We're just before this call today. I was in a meeting with my federal partners, and we are just now trying to specify those locations for the artificial nesting platforms. And this is related to the 4th objective, and that's monitoring of loon productivity. For 2 summers, our federal partners and myself and 2 other DNR employees, loon specialists that work for me, that is with me, that is Spencer Rettler and Liz Rasmussen. We took 70 lakes across 8 counties, and we looked at loon territorial behavior, nesting behavior, chick production, and chick survival through August. And we looked at those, and it helps us decide what the effects of that of the oil spill was to our Minnesota loons, and it helps us with that second objective of where, if anywhere, are we going to suggest we put an AMP to increase production. In other words, if Lake Alice, if we've looked at it for 2 years and historically it had loon production, they had, let's say Lake Alice had five loon pairs on it, and they all had chicks every year, and then all of a sudden they didn't. Well, that might be a spot to put one of these artificial nesting platforms. Some of the background data beyond the 2 years of study we did with our partners included the Loon Watcher Survey. I'm going to assume you may be familiar with that. If you're not, hop on the DNR website and put in Loon Watcher. It's a program that's 4 decades old now that we have relied on what folks like you, people I call citizen scientists, to work with us to collect data on loons on your lake. I can give you more information on that if you'd like when I'm done with the presentation. But that set the standard for looking at those 70 lakes and deciding about objective 2. The final objective, and this is the one I'm having the most fun with, is promoting stewardship of lakes in a loon positive direction. And that is working with lake associations, lakeshore owners, county coalitions, folks like you, to both increase loon conservation activities on lakes and to increase knowledge of the effects of habitat loss, of lead poisoning, et cetera, on things that might decrease our loon populations. Like I said, we're in 8 counties here. I hope you can see that. Mine looks a little blurry on my screen, but screens vary. So the counties are Beltrami, Clearwater, Becker, Hubbard, Cass, Crow Wing, Aiken, and Itasca. And while there are loons in other places in Minnesota, that's the biggest concentration of habitat that is loon centric in the entire state. We chose it because of the high potential to sustain quality loon habitat. Remember, we're trying to either acquire loon habitat or protect it, and then confidence that our conservation efforts would make a difference in that in these high loon use areas, especially for reproduction. So this is a closer look at that of what we're talking about here for the different 4 objectives. This kind of justifies the idea that the biggest bang for your dollar that we can get with loon conservation is protecting their nesting habitat. They build their nest in the shorelines. They take about a month, and then we have chicks that are free swimming and learning how to feed and rearing and getting ready for migration. So all those elements, nesting, rearing the young, getting ready to migrate with those and feeding on those Cisco, that all is dependent on shoreline. That's why we think this is such a big objective of the program. Augmenting with artificial nesting platforms is important, can be. In this picture here, you see a loon sitting on a natural mud and cattail nest. And if you look in the background there, I hope you can tell that is an artificial nesting platform. I'm going to give credit here for that one to the folks on Big Mantrap Lake in Hubbard County. They got one doozy of an artificial nesting platform. That is all aluminum. It has a predator guard defense system on the top. It has a ramp that the loons can walk up on. You're probably familiar that while amazing swimmers and competent flyers, loons can't walk to save their lives. Yes, occasionally they will, and I get reports of it, and I've seen it myself, but boy, they don't care for it. So little ramp to get up there on the nest. When do we want an AMP to be out there? Here's a list of reasons when you would. Water levels fluctuate. I talked about that. Nests can be flooded. Is predation a problem? It often is, either by land mammals, because these birds often put their nests up on land, at least on the shoreline, or by birds of prey, eagles, osprey, not as much, but eagles in particular. And then if there's just limited natural nesting habitat, think about some of the hyper-developed lakes we have. So objective 3, of course, is the stewardship thing. Now, here's how that breaks down. The stewardship element breaks down by documenting history on the lake. They probably have that. We probably have that through our Loon Watcher database. Considering how the lake has changed, I need that information from the folks I talked to at the lake associations. How is nesting, rearing, and foraging going? I need that information from those folks. connecting them with the MPCA, and then recommending voluntary actions. And the way we're doing this is we created this idea of a loon-friendly registry. And what that is we have gone through all those 8 counties and gone across all the different survey lakes and non-survey lakes, just any lakes that have loons. And we've gathered what I like to call loon liaisons. These are folks that work with us for the loons on their lake. They get in that registry by doing a couple of things. One, agreeing to either continue to or start to be part of the Loon Watcher survey. And then remember, this is all voluntary. And then also working with us, we drafted templates for what we call loon-friendly lake management plans. I draft the template and I send it to the loon liaison, and they fill in information on the loons on their lake in particular. That puts them in the registry, and then we work together. There's actual management recommendations in the plan. For example, working with MPCA to have them come and speak to their association, to have me come and speak to their association, and talk about all these different management procedures and whatnot that I've said during this presentation. And then this final element is monitoring. So we've had 2 years of monitoring as agencies. We probably have 1 more. And then after that, we're going to rely on these 2 programs. One is the Loon Watcher Survey, which I've already spoke about. The other one is the Minnesota Loon Monitoring Program. Now, folks get confused by these 2, and I understand why. But if you go on the website, you can see the difference between the 2. I'll give you a blurb about it right now. Loon Watcher is all summer. Loon Watchers every year. Loon Watchers any lake that has loons on it. We'll take it from Worthington, Minnesota to International Falls. If you have annual loons on your lake, Loon Watchers for you. Minnesota Loon Monitoring Program is a special index of surveys that we've been doing on for 20 years now on 600 lakes in particular that we're interested in. It's in conservation biology. There's several different kinds of surveys. The idea of an index, that's just is something there, is it not? So you can do an index on red fox. You can do an index on monarch butterflies if you want. You're not counting how many there are or what state the population's in. You're just reporting on presence, absence. That's what the Minnesota Loon Monitoring Program is. Those lakes were picked by loon experts, and we have folks out there just like the Loon Watcher folks, and they report on a 10-day period, usually in the middle of the summer, on population changes and reproductive success. In other words, go out there in July on your lake, if you're one of the 600, and report what you see. Do you see loons? Good. Is it a pair? Great. Do they have chicks? Yes. Thank you. And that's the index for that. So you wrap all these objectives together, and we have a positive program to look at loons in the state. So when we get the question in 10 years, what's the state of the loon population? We're able to answer it. Side note, we do have some hard data from our neighbors to the east, Wisconsin. And there are some areas that Dr. Walter Piper reported a 23% decrease in loons. Why? I don't know. We don't know. But we certainly don't want that to happen to our Minnesota loons. So, we're kind of, like I said, getting out in front of the problem here before it even surfaces. I want to stress this part. We are partners not only with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Geological Survey, but we're also partners with Minnesota Pollution Control. They have folks over there as part of a Get the Lead Out program. Now, that goes back to 2010, but right now, for the first time, they have 2 permanent employees working on that program. It's a wonderful program. I'm a big angler myself, and it has been a real kick in the pants for me to look at my tackle, which my wife would tell you is way too much, and see what, how much lead have I got in there. And I'm going to be honest with you folks, a lot. And if I'm representative of the population of anglers out there, we got some work to do. So this is a great program. We work with them, and I highly encourage you, if you're going to do some follow-up after this presentation today, also go to the MPCA website and look up Get the Lead Out. Well, real quick before the final slide with our contact information, what's great about this Get the Lead Out program and how it's evolved and grown is when I first heard about lead as a problem for mortality for birds, eagles, loons in particular, the choices for lead-free tackle were very limited and very expensive. When you go on the NPCA Get the Lead Out webpage, you'll see the times are changing. There's a lot of better tackle on there that's lead free, and as the market forces work on that to reduce the prices, more folks can check it out. I believe there's a database on that website of brands and types and all of that for you to look at. So highly encourage you to do that. This is our information, just at DNR, not MPCA. You'll have to get that from them, but myself, my 2 employees, that's the email address, mlrp.dnr@state. Write that down. I'll leave this up. And then we also have non-game biologists that work on the Loon Watcher survey and amongst other things. They're stationed in Brainerd, Bemidji, and Grand Rapids. I work with them as well on this project because they were working on the Loon Watcher data for years before we started this project. So they're important folks to know of as well. But I would say if you've got a loon question, the first stop is probably that email right there, MLRP. That's the Minnesota Loon Restoration Project website. That goes, or email, that goes right to me. So I can help you out there. So that's what I've got for an official presentation. I hope that was interesting. I hope it spawned some questions. I see Waverly has popped back up again. Hi. So yeah, if there's any questions, fire away. I can't put the video on. I apologize. It'll crash my system, but I'll do my best to answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll find it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob, for your great presentation on this program. And do we have any questions for Rob? You can type them in the chat function, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question out loud. But if you do unmute yourself, we just
hey, hi there. I don't want to interrupt, but
yes.
Okay, Waverly and Rob. This is George Haynes, and my wife and I are on the board of the Net Lake Association.
And I'm the water monitor.
And Roseanne is the local water monitor. But the association participated in Get the Lead Out last summer, and we retrieved many, many ounces. I haven't weighed them all, but we have many containers full of lead jigs and lead sinkers that Net Lake residents turned in at our annual picnic.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I haven't brought them to someplace to dispose of properly, but they are all on a shelf, secure on a shelf in our garage and not at the bottom of Net Lake.
That's wonderful. I know
That's
Net
awesome.
Lake, so I'm glad to hear that. You can turn those into a hazardous waste facility. The more information on the MPCA's website. They may even have lists of where they are. I don't, but I know that's the guidance. Hazardous waste.
Okay, now how do I turn it back to mute?
Are you on a phone?
Yes,
Can you try to press *6?
that's how I unmuted it. So I'll try that again. Okay.
Okay.
And then I'll say okay, and then you tell me if you heard me say okay.
Okay. You're good. You're muted.
I have a question too.
Fire away.
We are on a small bay off Leech Lake and have been there since 1974 and had loons nesting every year until about 5 years ago. And I don't know if we got a new pair in there, but in the last 5 years, they have only this last year been successful in nesting. For the last 3 years, we've had swans nesting in our bay. Do they butt heads? Is there a problem? Will they chase them out territorially?
They're both there. Yeah, the great question. They both act. So loons are absolutely territorial. They'll kill each other for their territories. I've seen it happen. Swans can be aggressive. I think we know that story. We know how they act around geese. I have not seen interactions between swans and loons directly, and I don't have any data to support either way. But my wildlife instincts tell me that that possibility exists. Sure, it exists. It exists that they would not care for being around one another.
And if you were going to apply for one of these artificial nesting platforms, which website would we go to?
Well,
Or
yep, I'll explain how that works. So, right now, for artificial nesting platforms, we have to first go through a list of what we call treatment lakes. And those are the lakes that our 2 years of loon surveys told us need. Okay, so first those come first, and then you would work with me for your lake to determine whether or not it would help. And
Mhm.
they're not a cure-all. So if you have a situation like yours, Jim, where it's like, oh gosh, we've had loons my whole life, all of a sudden we don't, then they show up but they don't nest. What's going on? That's something you and I would talk about. Um,
Yeah.
for the artificial nesting platform, we would like folks to first go through a loon friendly plan with us. Like I said, that's a template that
Yeah.
we just ask folks to fill in information like uh, just specific questions about your lake in particular, much like you said, Jim. Oh, I know they're here. They were here for 30 years, and then they weren't. Then they were. That kind of stuff. So you can contact me, Jim, through that email address, and we can work together
Okay.
on that question.
All right. I'll do that then. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. No problem. Also to note, Jim brought up a good point. Applying for AMPs, you don't. But what you do need to do is get a permit to place it in the water. And that is not me. That is your county sheriff's department. I know it's kind of a hassle, but DNR, right? They're loons. Why don't we do it? Well, we don't. And I'll be honest with you folks, I don't know why we don't, because it's a navigable water, and that's not our jurisdiction for placing objects. Basically, is what it
And
amounts
of
to.
course, like most other places, we've had a huge increase in the eagle population and they nest very close by. And so I'm
Yes.
sure that
Yep.
that's affecting it too.
Yep. So before I get in, it is Jim. They usually do. The literature says it's a bit overrated, but we know it happens. Before I get another question, I think maybe time dependent here. I should probably look at the chat because there's a bunch of questions in there. Is that
Okay.
all right? Is that all right?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes, I
thanks,
can
Jim.
read those questions to you, Rob. So the first question was, where can we find the list of 600 lakes in the program?
I believe if you go to the main DNR website and you put in Minnesota Loon Monitoring Program, it'll take you to a website for that program, and the index lakes should be in there. I know there's a way to sort of apply to see if your lake can be one, so they should be listed. If they're not, then go back to that other address, MLRP, and find me, and I'll try to guide you to that answer.
Great, thank you. And then, so another question. I live in southeastern Minnesota Bluff Country. Is getting let out as important down here, including the Mississippi River? If so, why?
Well, my agency doesn't have any official word on the use of lead for anything. Uh, we haven't. Let's also remember that that's not the DNR's. We don't have the ability to do such a thing. It's the legislature. So there is no official law. You can't use lead. There's a federal law. You can't use it to shoot at waterfowl. And if anybody remembers the history of that, I do. And that was a contentious battle to even get to that point. Uh, is it important in bluff country? I would argue it's probably important everywhere, just because of lead in the environment. I got to take off my DNR hat, put on my Citizen Rob hat, and say that's my personal opinion. So, yeah, I mean there's loons down there, so I've seen them. I hunt deer down by Lake City sometimes with a friend, and I've seen them down on the pools down there. So probably important.
Thank you. Do you have a relationship with the National Loon Center in Cross Lake?
I do. John Mobeck is the newer president, and John and I have been speaking, working together. I highly recommend going up there and going on their pontoon tour in the summer. They've got Dr. Piper working with them on loon research, and they've got a really cool program where they've got loons tagged on their legs, and they monitor those loons all summer. As well, I'm due to talk to John again about part of our study on his lake. Cross Lake Reservoir is where that loon center is, and that is a full of loon activity, and it was one of our 70 survey lakes.
Great. So someone asked, is there any evidence of avian influenza in loons?
Possibly. Isn't that a wonderful government answer? There were two that may have been positive, and I have not heard back yet whether they were. It looks like there's. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Waverly. There's a really long question from Victoria. Did we miss that one?
Oh, yes, I'm still getting down to there. We're getting all sorts of great questions.
Okay, yeah, keep going.
So Mike asked, he travels northern Minnesota and talks to a lot of folks. People always complain about eagle predation, killing all loon chicks. You have an idea of what level of problem it really is?
Yeah, we kind of
touched
touched
on this
on
earlier.
level of problem is a tough way to frame it. Like, do I have data? Nope. But what we do have is decades of anecdotal evidence that it happens. We know it happens. No one's done any study on the extent of which it's happened. I can visualize a study that could be put together with trail cameras on known loon nest locations. We could get an idea, but no one's designed that study yet. So you might have to go look into the literature. You'd be surprised what the general public can find by just hopping online and going into the scientific literature. There's a bunch of sites now where most of the time for free you can join as a member, and then you can read entire what they call abstracts. You can read entire studies on different things, and I've done that for loon predation with eagles, and I don't get any back that are what I would call hard data. In other words, we looked at 1,000 lakes and 500 of them had eagle predation. I haven't seen it framed in that way. I've just only seen it framed that it's a common occurrence, for whatever that means. We know it happens. I'm sorry, I can't give you numbers.
Is there particular types of lead tackle that are more likely to be ingested by loons, or is just all of it a problem?
It's all a problem, but I would argue that the two biggest ones would be jigs, especially if you think about the smaller ones, I suppose, 1/8 ounce, and the pinch weights used for like float fishing for panfish. Because honest to Pete, you tell me you could see the difference between one of those sitting on the bottom and a pebble. You can't.
We have a question. I live in the Twin Cities. The loons on my lake are losing nesting sites due to geese out competing them. Would the artificial nesting platforms help?
In that particular case, intuition would tell me yes. Geese can be fairly aggressive, as we know. I've spent most of my career 2 weeks in July trapping them and putting bands on their legs for a federal program that we monitor their populations with, and I've had the snot kicked out of me by those things. So yeah, they can be aggressive, and it is what it is. But loons certainly would fight for their territories. But I've heard, this isn't the first time I've heard this, that people are worried. There's a couple lakes up in this work area here, Becker and Hubbard County, where folks are watching the geese and loons fight every spring. The only weapon we have against that is, as an agency, is just goose harvest, and just continue to encourage folks to waterfowl hunt. You probably know the numbers for waterfowl hunting continue to decline every year. So if those numbers could be boosted, then you'd probably have fewer problems. Putting an A&P out there on a lake where geese are a problem, it might help. Again, I haven't seen it done to see if it works, but if you think about it, most of our geese these days nest on shoreline or islands. So I don't expect they would trouble an artificial nesting platform, and I've never heard of them trying to use one. So.
Thank you. So I have a great question from Victoria. So Victoria's been doing Loon Watch since 2018 on Snowbank Lake in Lake County. And this summer, there was a large amount of nest failures with 2 eggs abandoned on 5 nests with pairs that were reliably having 1 to 2 chicks in the past. Do the eggs ever get collected and analyzed?
Yes, we have in the past. So have other agencies. As soon as I jumped on board this project, we stopped collecting them. So I don't have a history of collecting them. The non-game folks for years collected them to see what was going on. I know federal folks have collected them as well. I believe the National Loon Center might have a permit to do such a thing. I know Dr. Walter Piper has. I'm wondering if the question, Victoria, is trying to see, does the egg collection somehow give you an answer to why they're failing? Generally, somebody put their hand up too, Waverly, there on the screen. Generally, the failures are due to some of the factors that we talked about earlier. Water level fluctuations, predation, and one I didn't mention, and I apologize, is black flies. Black fly densities, which vary with climatic factors every spring, are a huge problem for loons. Loons will not tolerate sitting on a nest for long if we have high densities of black fly eruptions in the spring. They're too troublesome. They bite, they bother the loons. The loons will leave the nest to flush the flies off their heads by diving, and pretty soon you have eggs that don't get incubated and they rot. They fail.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. This is Victoria, by the way. Thank you. And yes, there was a black fly outbreak this spring for sure. When we find these eggs, should we report it anywhere, or it is just what it is?
I think it is what it is. You're up in Lake County. You might call or email the non-game specialist up there. I think it's Gia, and that was on that slide. Otherwise, I'll keep saying it. Just email me, folks, and I'll get you to the right person. Egg collection for our program was said to be no, don't do it, so I'm not. And I know the Brainerd non-game specialist has no interest at this point, but I don't know about the whole state. So feel free to send me an email, Victoria, and I can ask. And first, I got to see if Gia is the right person.
Okay, thank you.
Then we can figure it out.
We have another question in the chat. Our local Boy Scouts made loon nests as a project that another lake association purchased. We have been thinking about getting some made for our lake. Are artificial nests available for purchase from the DNR?
No.
No.
Nope. We don't make them. We don't sell them. But who is that was asking? What county are they in? Probably doesn't say.
Jessica, what county are you in? Maybe she'll type it in the chat.
Sure. If you're in the county within that work area, we can talk, right? So one of the things that we're doing with the folks beyond those 70 treatment lakes, like I think it was Jim that asked, the artificial nesting platform style, we're trying to have everybody build the same. And once we get past those treatment lakes, we can submit to the folks who are also interested. We can work with them. And if we determine, hey, you know what, your lake would benefit, we're trying to have them all built the same way. And in fact, we have supply lists of exactly what to buy. And then we put together both instructions on a document, and we made an instructional video on how to build it. It's made out of PVC pipe, Schedule 40 4-inch pipe. But first, we got to get through that sort of first step of working with us to determine whether or not whether it would be useful to your loons.
Jessica said McLeod County.
cloud. Yeah, you're not in my work. That doesn't. Email me anyway. We may be limited with our federal partners to only support them in that 8-county area because this is shared funding, so that we have a lot more limitations on it than programs that are not joint programs. But email me, we'll figure it out.
I have another question from Bill. How do I get assistance with choosing a location for an AMP? I have put one out the past 5 years and it has never been used. I'm on Round Lake next to the Tamarack Refuge. Also, as a site steward for Greenwater Lake SNA, I'm wondering if placing one there would be beneficial.
On SNA, you'd have to ask Amy. If I'm gathering where you are, you're by Tamarack National Wildlife Refuge. If that's where you are, then I think the non-game specialist is Amy Westmark. Amy Westmark. And you'd have to see what's going on with Amy and her thoughts on that. Plus, if it's anywhere on the refuge, you'd have to talk to our federal folks there. But we put together that's the specific stuff, the hoops you jump through. In terms of where to put an AMP to make it more effective, we put together a decision matrix that looks at the ecology on your lake, loon use, development on the shore. There are a bunch of factors. And we kind of are able to then take any lake and plug it in and see through a point system whether it's helpful at all on that lake. And then once it is, we can look at the characteristics of that lake and see where it might most benefit. Is it in a quiet bay? Is it near undeveloped shoreline? Is there another loon territory there that we know about from data, from the past? There's a bunch of factors that go into it. I can walk you through that. So again, hit up that email address and I'll respond to you and we can look at it together.
Yeah, we also got some statements. So Kyle is part of the Get the Let Out team at the MPCA. He says your answers have been spot on. And then feel free to reach out to the Let Out team with any questions, and that's letout@state.mn.us. Yes. And then Natasha from the National Loon Center is also on. And she said, we have permits to collect loon mortalities for necropsies, but they haven't collected eggs so far. But it may be a possibility in the future, depending on research funding and collaborations. And that's it for the chat. So if anyone has any more quick questions, you can unmute yourself to ask Rob.
While you do that, I want to thank Kyle and Natasha for helping out. I've talked to Kyle in meetings, I think over Zoom or whatever, Teams. Natasha, I met, I believe, because I went up there and presented and went on their pontoon ride, which I forgot the name of it, Natasha. I apologize, but I highly recommend it for everybody. It's educational and above all else, a lot of fun.
Do we have any more questions? And if you had questions that we could get to today, feel free to email us at the Volunteer Water Monitoring Program, or also feel free to contact Rob directly with the email he shared earlier. And yeah, we will be sending out this recording shortly as well. And if that's it, then thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
The stewardship. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. I got to jump on another one here. Great time. Great questions, by the way. Love it. Please hit up that email and we can continue to answer anything I may have punted on or missed or whatever. I really appreciate your interest in our program. It's been a lot of fun. And folks like you are, in my opinion, what drive the program, because it's very much centered towards stakeholders. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining.
I know.